Welcome to our In Focus discussion tonight. During the 2020 Utah legislative session, lawmakers passed Senate Bill 174. This law will go into effect if Roe v. Wade were to be overturned by the Supreme Court, and then each state would be responsible for its own laws regarding abortion. In October, the Supreme Court will hear a review on the constitutionality of a law on abortion from Mississippi, and their ruling on that case could have an impact on Utah's abortion trigger law. Kicking off our conversation tonight is Justin Collings. He's a professor of constitutional law at Reuben J. Clark Law School at Brigham Young University. Justin, we really appreciate your time. Thanks for being here with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, we wanted to kick off with you just for a neutral look at this, just getting into the facts. Tell us what the text of this law says, and what does SB 174 say about restricting abortions in our state?
Well, the law would restrict abortions throughout pregnancy in all but a very narrow set of circumstances. So except for cases of rape or incest or a threat of death or a serious and irreversible injury to the mother, or cases in which the child had a severe brain abnormality to the point that it would survive only in a vegetative state.
Mm-hmm. And to my understanding, unlike the law the Supreme Court is going to hear, which would be at 15 weeks, this one is pretty much an all-out ban other than those circumstances you just mentioned.
That's correct, and from the beginning of pregnancy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we've called this a trigger law. So what circumstances would it take to activate this law in the state of Utah?
Well, at the conclusion of the law, it says that the law will go into effect if the Supreme Court should decide that each state is free to issue whatever abortion regulations it chooses from the beginning of pregnancy.
There's a clause in the law that says if there is a conflict in the Utah Code with the law takes precedent. What exactly does that mean?
Well, that means that if there's some other provision in the Utah Code that provided other protections for abortion, or that somehow conflicted with this trigger law, that this one would take precedence. Now, typically a law passed later in time always takes precedence over an earlier law, but because this law didn't go into effect at the time it was issued, presumably that provision would allow this law to trump even a law that had been passed since 2020 when this law was adopted.
Mm-hmm. A lot of conversation surrounding Roe v. Wade. It happened several decades ago. A lot of people probably know the title more than they actually know what the ruling says. So can you give us a little background on that?
Sure. Well, there are two fundamental holdings in Roe. The first is that there is a constitutional right to abortion. And the second was the court's application of that. And the Roe court adopted a trimester framework. They said during the first trimester, states cannot regulate abortion at all. During the second trimester, states can regulate abortion only to promote the health of the expectant mother. And only during the third trimester, after the point of viability, do states have an interest in protecting the life of an unborn child.
Mm-hmm. Another case that perhaps people haven't heard so much about is Casey versus Planned Parenthood. Tell us about that ruling and how it relates to the Utah abortion trigger law.
Sure. Well, Casey was a 1992 decision, and for many conservatives, this was seen as the golden opportunity to overturn Roe v. Wade. At the time, 8 of the 9 justices on the Supreme Court had been appointed by Republican presidents, and the 9th Justice, Justice Byron White, had dissented in Roe v. Wade. So it seemed like the votes were there. Initially they might have been, but Justice Anthony Kennedy switched his vote, and a plurality of 3 justices wrote an opinion upholding Roe, but making 4 important changes. So the Casey holding did away with the trimester framework and instead adopted a test of whether the law imposes an undue burden on the expectant mother.
The U.S. Supreme Court agreed to hear the case we have talked about, the constitutionality of the case in Mississippi, which bans abortions at 15 weeks. So talk to us about what will happen either way that the Supreme Court rules on this. How would it impact the law here in Utah?
Well, it would affect the law in Utah because Utah has adopted a different law that bans abortions after 18 weeks. So if the Supreme Court upheld a law that banned abortions after 15 weeks, presumably the law beginning at 18 weeks would be valid as well. But it would depend on what the Supreme Court's holding said. The Utah trigger law says that it will go into force only if the court gives states discretion to regulate abortion throughout pregnancy. So that law might not be triggered if the Supreme Court were simply to say that under the Casey framework, a law that still allowed abortion during the first 15 weeks did not impose an undue burden.
Okay. I know it's hard to look into the crystal ball and see what's going to happen, but given your legal expertise, talk about how you think this could all play out with the Supreme Court.
Well, it would be a pretty dramatic holding for the court to say that there is no constitutional right to an abortion. I think the Chief Justice John Roberts prefers to decide cases based on existing precedent and to change the law incrementally. So I think his preference would be simply to say, if they were to uphold Mississippi's law, to say that it doesn't impose an undue burden, not to overthrow, and that the court doesn't need to reach the Roe holding in its entirety. But he is only one of 6 conservative justices now, and the other 5 have the votes if they wanted to overturn Roe. But the court hasn't, in the last year or two, moved as quickly as some have hoped or others have feared. And so my prediction would be that the court would take a more incremental approach. And if they did overturn Roe, that they would do so in perhaps a less dramatic way.
And what would that mean for us here in Utah?
Well, it would mean, according to the text of SB 174, that it would not go into force. Mm-hmm. So unless the court overturns Roe entirely and rules that there is no constitutional right to abortion, the trigger law would not be triggered.
Okay. Again, Justin Collings, professor of constitutional law at Brigham Young University. Very impactful insight, and we appreciate it. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Thanks so much for staying with us for our second In Focus discussion tonight on Utah's abortion trigger law. Up next in our conversation is Marylee Boyak. She is the chair of Abortion Free Utah Coalition. Marylee, thanks for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
We'd like to start with hearing you build your case. You spent a lot of time and effort advocating for SB 174 last year. Talk about why you support the law to ban abortions here in the state.
You know, I think we need to really clarify that this law is focused on the elective abortions. This is approximately 98% of the abortions that occur. In the state of Utah, we have 3,000, roughly on average, elective abortions every year. And that means 8 babies a day in the state of Utah are losing their lives. And we love the babies. We love preborn children. And so it's very, very important to us to do what we can do to help support them and to help them have that right to life. They have value and they have a right to exist. You know, the Guttmacher Institute, which is with Planned Parenthood as partners, reports there are 73 million abortions in the world every year. Every year. And in the United States, that number from Roe v. Wade till now is 60 million abortions. And proponents always say they always wanted it to be safe and rare, and that is not rare. Those numbers are not rare. So we feel that it's just really critically important. You know, when I'm talking about this, I typically ask 3 questions. 1, is it alive? Of course. 2, is it a human being? Of course, it's not a fish or a dog. And so then we have to ask that critical question. When is it okay to take the life of another human being? The law provides that that's self-defense. And so if these babies were born and they were alive, they would be protected. But they are not protected in utero. And we just think that this law is so critical in valuing these children and giving them the right to life that they deserve.
Talk a little bit about your thoughts on how most Utahns feel about this. This is a very controversial issue. We talk about it a lot at the legislative session, and then of course, you know, last year the bill passed. But do you believe that in the state of Utah, most people would support a complete ban on abortion?
And again, we need to clarify this is only a ban on elective abortion, but I believe absolutely that they would. These are abortions of convenience, remember that. Very, very different from those exceptions that have been detailed earlier. I think absolutely Utah is a pro-life state. We value our preborn children. We love our babies. I think that the vast majority are. I know sometimes Planned Parenthood will trot out their polls, which we believe are biased. Salt Lake County is probably about 50-50, but of course the rest of the state is significantly and enthusiastically pro-life.
I do want to point out we're going to be hearing from Planned Parenthood in the next segment. So moving on with you, if this law is enacted, do you think it would be effective in eliminating, as you put it, elective abortions?
Absolutely. You know, we feel that the law is written very, very well. It's very clear. It has those compassionate exceptions, which I think appeals to everyone. So I absolutely believe that this will be effective. You know, and bottom line, we have great doctors in the state of Utah who obey the law. And so I think that this will do what it was meant to do.
And the penalty for doing so under the law would be a Class 2 felony. So you believe that would keep people from performing those procedures?
Yes, I think we have very good doctors in the state of Utah. They, you know, by and large want to do what's right. They're going to obey the law. They don't want to lose their practice. So yeah, I think that that will be effective.
Address this idea that we have heard from opponents that this would turn abortion into something that only people of means would have access to. In other words, those with means would be able to travel to another state where laws are different.
You know, honestly, we don't want anyone to end the life of their child with an abortion of convenience. And so I actually feel sorry for those that would have the means to be able to do that. But you know, I've had a thought. Planned Parenthood of Utah has annual revenues of roughly $12 million. And so if they feel so strongly about it, perhaps they could provide sponsorships for needy women. We hope that they wouldn't, because we think all life is precious, no matter the wealth of their parents or not.
Looking ahead to the Supreme Court taking up this case in October, how do you see it potentially playing out?
We're very, very excited about this. We think that this is just a really great opportunity. The makeup of the court is very, very promising, and so we have high hopes that this will be, that the rights of the states will be affirmed in the fact that they have the right and the duty to legislate for health and safety. And you know, you got to look at this, 40 years. We now have so much more information about these preborn children. We have ultrasounds that show details of their fingers and their toes and how early they've developed. We have much more scientific information that they feel pain. We have videos of them trying to have that survival instinct and stay away from the suction device. So I think we just know a whole lot more, and I think people now understand that. I think the Supreme Court understands that, and so we very, very enthusiastically look forward to the fact that they are going to overturn this and turn this back to the states.
In the event they do not do that, though, what would be your next step?
Well, we have many laws that we are looking at to protect the lives of children and to support the women and promote healthier alternatives for women. And so we will just continue working hard to bless the lives of these babies and these women and try to save as many lives as we can. Okay, once again, we've been hearing from Marylee Boyak. She is the chair of Abortion Free Utah Coalition. We appreciate your time. Thanks for being here. Thank you.
We'll be back with Planned Parenthood. Stay with us. Welcome to our third and final In Focus discussion tonight on Utah's abortion trigger law. Rounding out the conversation is Carrie Galloway, President and CEO of Planned Parenthood Association of Utah. Carrie, great to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for including us in the conversation.
Yeah, let's dig into this. You were a big part in opposing this law on Utah's Capitol Hill. Let's hear your case, why you were against SB 174.
Well, we have always felt that Roe versus Wade was rightfully decided and that a woman does have a constitutional right over bodily autonomy. And so our feeling in choosing an arbitrary date of 18 weeks was foolish and didn't solve any problems for people trying to raise healthy, happy, productive families.
We talked a little bit about this with our last guest. She even referenced some polling that you have done, which she claimed was biased. So let's hear your side of that. When it comes to Utahns supporting complete bans on abortions, what are your thoughts?
Well, we went to Dan Jones, and we don't consider them to be biased. They're a good quality polling company here in Utah. And before the legislative session happened in 2020, we wanted to ask some questions. And one question that we asked was, do you want to overturn Roe versus Wade? And it came back with 52% were not willing to overturn Roe versus Wade. And what was even more interesting is because we knew we were going into a legislative session where opponents had said they were going to make it difficult for us to continue to provide abortion. We asked people what sort of restriction should be on abortion, and we let them know what restrictions we already had here in Utah. 80% of the people responded, Utah has enough restrictions. And 52% of them said, don't overturn Roe versus Wade. People understand the need for comprehensive reproductive health care being a choice.
If Roe v. Wade is overturned and we do see SB 174 fully implemented in the state of Utah, there are exceptions, but other than that, do you believe it would be effective in eliminating abortion in our state?
You know, the sad part is, Glenn, I look at history over time, from the beginning of time. Women are the people who take care of their families. They're the people who become pregnant, and they do what they have to do for the strength and good health of their family. We have seen women over time taking care of their own health care. Unfortunately, that's why abortion is safe and legal now, because women will go to other means if necessary. And unfortunately, we don't seem to take that into consideration.
So do you believe then that women would turn to back alley procedures, for lack of a better term?
Unfortunately, they will. There is also medication abortion. Those prescriptions can be gotten on the internet. It's not how I would recommend women take care of things, but women do what needs to be done.
The new law would state that a doctor performing an abortion would be a Class 2 felony. Your thoughts on that?
You know, it puts doctors in such a tough position. Doctors go into the profession to care for people. Think about managing miscarriage, fetal demise. There are issues that then physicians will have to second guess themselves. I'm sure they have to put a punishment on it because good people take care of each other. But it's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to get your thoughts on something Marylee also brought up, and that is there are other alternatives. One being, going through with the birth and adoption. Talk about your thoughts on that and why not going down that road instead.
Well, this is the point where I would say there's an even better choice, and that's the state promoting and helping women and families get access to birth control. We talk a lot in this state of loving families, loving women, loving children, but we don't put it into action. For 2 years, we have had legislators try to expand Medicaid for those people who don't have insurance or can't afford health care, to include more expansive birth control. For 2 years, the legislature fought it and did not prioritize it. Better sex education. You know, there are so many ways you could help families rather than punishing doctors and making laws feeling that you know better how a family should make their decisions.
I'd like to get your thoughts on what you think is going to happen with the Supreme Court in this Mississippi law.
Oh, I don't even like to think about it, to be honest with you, Glenn. You know, Marylee was right. It's a court that's conservative, but we have certainly seen Chief Justice move with great care. One thing I want to talk about is this arbitrary weeks on these laws that we have here in Utah and that the court is going to bring up. These are before fetal testing is even done, for women to be able to know if they have to make a tough decision. It's where things don't come together. People just want to run other people's lives. They're not putting themselves in those shoes. And it's just very hard for me to think about what could happen with this Supreme Court.
All right, well, it is something we will be watching and waiting to see what does happen. Carrie, thanks for your time tonight. I appreciate it.
Again, thanks for having us.
We'll be right back. Stay with us.